If someone asked you right now, what is one of the secrets to true fulfillment, what would you say? Well, Austin Hill Shaw is here to talk with us about this unique and defining part of our humanness. Hi, Austin.
Hi, how are you? Nice to see
Oh,
you.
thank you. I'm doing so well, and thanks so much for joining us. And so I would love for you to talk about what is this big secret to fulfillment?
Well, it's interesting because it took me a long time to figure that out myself, but it kind of comes down to one simple word that you've heard all over the place, and that is creativity. Creativity, I believe, is the secret to human fulfillment. And it seems like a oversimplified answer, but when we really consider what we do within the creative process, and if we look at ourselves as humans to be, that creativity is our most defining trait, then we can start to see how when we engage in creative pursuits, whatever they are, and that doesn't mean artistic pursuits, but that means anything that we apply the creative mindset to, we discover that we see the world very differently. And so creativity draws upon the best of all we have to offer. It uses the subtle nature of our bodies, all the different things that we can do with them, our coordination, our fingers, our dexterity. It draws upon our minds and our ability to conceptualize things and envision and remember and plan. That is why when we are engaged in creative pursuits, we feel so satisfied and so fulfilled.
Yeah, really good points. And you touched on something really, really important that I'd like us to just kind of talk about for a minute. And that is that creativity is not necessarily about like artistic stuff like, oh, I'm a painter, I'm a potter, I do this, I do that. I've heard people say often, oh, I'm not creative at all, I don't have a creative bone in my body. What would you say to those people?
Well, I would say that everybody is a creator, first and foremost. As a human being, and I really believe this, and I not only believe this, but in all the different types of reading I've done and research and conversations with people from all different disciplines, from science and technology, from art and business, and even from religious and spiritual traditions, there's a reason that, for instance, they call God the creator, right? And that we value creative people in society. For example, Steve Jobs. You're simply activating something within them that perhaps lies dormant in a lot of people. But it doesn't mean just because it lies dormant, it doesn't mean it's not there. And so I'm really on a mission to empower others as creators. And the first thing I say to people is that creativity is not a gift of certain individuals and not others. It is a defining trait of what it means to be human. And I say when I go and talk to audiences, I say, if you don't get anything out of this presentation, just recognize you as an identity, you as a being are first and foremost a creator. And therefore, it doesn't matter what you do. You can be a creative auto mechanic. You can be a creative parent. You can be a creative physician. You can be a creative engineer. The people who do what they do best are always employing creativity. I like to think of, for example, the top one, sort of the number one and two contenders for the greatest scientists ever, Einstein and Newton. Both of them were true mystics who had this incredible reverence for the natural world and recognized that their contributions were always built on the contributions of others, and their ability to suspend their beliefs about what things were or what things weren't were precisely what allowed them to come up with things such as the law of universal gravitation and the theory of relativity. So those are scientists that are employing sort of spiritual practices in order to come up with hypotheses that they would later prove. And the same thing goes for on the spiritual end of the spectrum. There are people out there, for example, you think of the Dalai Lama in Tibetan Buddhism, how they say we are not actually religiously oriented. We're not particularly dogmatic. We are dealing with the science of mind on an experiential basis. And so those two, people are coming up with very interesting ideas in that because they're, again, suspending their belief about the way things should be. So that's part of being a creator as well. constantly trying to look at things fresh while drawing upon things that you already know. So,
Yeah, those are great points. And you mentioned the activation of creativity. So, what came to mind is that I'd like for you to share with everyone kind of how did your activation in your own life happen? What was your experience that kind of really unleashed that fire within you so that you could help others?
so that's a great question. I've thought about that a lot because it certainly hasn't been a single event, but it's been kind of many different events throughout my life. But and what I would call them are generally experiences of insight, which is one of the most, the defining aspects of creativity, or those aha moments that we have. But I have one in particular that seems to stand out where I was a graduate student in architecture school, and I was between my first and second year. I was going to school at the University of Colorado, where I'm from. But that summer, I was working on a framing crew up in Crested Butte, Colorado. And while I was up there, when I would go to sleep at night, even though I was working on a project directly related to my career path, we were building a spec home in Crested Butte, I had this sense that I needed to be doing something more, like this taskmaster voice in the back of my head. Well, the weekend where I was supposed to go back to school, I was out on a mountain bike ride with a friend of mine who was much better mountain biker than I was, and I was playing catch up the whole time. And we came to this place where he was walking his bike because it was very technical, and I thought with my bruised ego, I'm going to ride this thing. And I didn't get more than 10 feet into this thing that my tire lodged, I went over my handlebars, and I drove my head into a pile of rocks. I probably had a major concussion. I was out there in the middle of the woods. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know where I was. We were far out there. So at one point I was able to stand up, and then as we got to easy sections, I was able to ride. My helmet was split in two, so we took it easy. But as time wore on, we found ourselves at a place where there's a loop that I recognized, and I said to my friend, hey, why don't you ride this loop? Because I just want to sit here for a little bit. And what was happening is that filter, whatever it was that was in place, was gone. And it wasn't that like the world was altered in some ways. It was just hyper real. And so there I was just sitting looking out at Crested Butte Valley with this sense of total connectedness. And it lasted all through the day and into the evening. We were celebratory because it was our last weekend there. The conversations were effortless. And then the next day I woke up, I had a pain in my neck and in my wrist, which is the second thing to hit the ground. And worse, that filter was back in place. But that kind of planted the seed. And it wouldn't be till 3 or 4 years later that I discovered meditation. And 2 years after that, went back up into the mountains to see if I could have the same experience simply through meditating. And I could. So that became an incredible tool for me. But that was the opening. And the other thing is I participated in a 3-month meditation retreat around that time, about 2004. And I was getting a teaching on the Wheel of Dharma, which is a traditional Tibetan Buddhist teaching. And when I was getting it, it's all about habitual patterns, but I had the sense of like, that's how people get stuck creatively. And something about that made me decide to just pursue it. And over an 8-year period, I ended up writing a book called The Shoreline of Wonder on being creative. So that was kind of how it started. And it continues to evolve. That's the wonderful thing about it. It continues to evolve as I have conversations with other creativity experts, but just people in terms of how they're perceiving what they're up to, especially those people that are on fire in some way, that they really are excited. And on the other end of the spectrum, people who are super broken, who feel like they don't have any hope, they're not sure what to do next. They may be professionals who have done everything right, but still feel their lives have meaning. Those are also people you can learn a lot about why creativity is not quite working within them yet. And so I'm a perpetual student of the subject.
That is an incredible story, and I thank you for sharing it about that experience of kind of piercing the veil, removing that filter, but accessing it through meditation. And I loved how you just said that how people, some people may, haven't accessed it, may not have accessed it yet.